Round of applause for MJ Cachón. I have a half an hour talk which I've prepared, and I only have 20 minutes for it, so I'm going to speak very quickly. First of all, I want to say my thanks to the organizers of this wonderful event. This is the biggest growing event in our sector, so round of applause to SEO and our sponsors, and to you as well for coming here every year and for making history. I am going to talk about migrations today. I'm sure that in the world of SEO you're also seeing migrations all the time. In 2019 I started doing some migrations as well on different threads, and this happens every year, and I thought that if this is happening every year anyway, perhaps I should do a little study on that. So last year I decided to do a study about what people in the sector think about migrations, and based on the results of the study we could think about what we could improve. So the survey, what does the sector think about migrations? I sent this survey out, and I hope all of you responded. This is very, very useful, but this kind of studies. There were 168 participants, and I analyzed all the answers. We had open and closed questions, and I also put together some perceptions and advice. So firstly, the question was, what are the factors that guarantee success in a migration? There were different factors that affect it. Secondly, do you consider that there are migrations that are more risky than others? And 98% thought that this was the case. Are there any types of migration that you consider more risky? And these are the types of migration that people consider more risky. So these were the perceptions. At the sector level, there are a lot of people who associate sectors like the health sector with higher risks than some others. So there are some sectors where people think that the risk is more acceptable than in others. And there was a lot of anonymity to some migrations. I also had some open questions, which were more like for giving advice. And this was aimed at helping us with the planning, with improving the technology. So some specific questions. And if there is a very big migration, there could also be limits to the amount of analysis that you can do. And finally, some experiences that people had. I asked people to share experience. Awareness raising is also very important, teamwork as well, and having a good strategy, so that at the level, at the moment of migration, but also before and after the migration. Here is the summary of the survey. So what can we do with these results? We can plan and control reroutings. And all of these people's answers were put together into this tool. So let's move on to the data about migrations. What do I do with this data? First, I want to remind you that this is data, this is not opinion-based, so this is all based on the answers that you gave, and you can carry out an analysis on that, but these are not norms. So I could put together like a summary of what people were doing, And I am not judging anyone on what they think in that context. So let's move on the presentation pros for a moment. So basically I was able to use tools like Systrix and Ahrefs to analyze this data. So these helped to make the analysis a lot more agile. I made a repository of 85 migrations. This was my methodology, and the number of migrations is increasing. I took the Systrix index of visibility, and I looked at data before and after migration. There's a variation percentage between 3, 6, and 12 months, which I analyzed. So looking at the type of migration, most of these were domain-to-domain migrations, and the status showed that there was a drop in 33%, a rise in 65%, and no change in 2%. There were a lot of migrations in the media sector, so more than 30%. Looking at the year, most of the migrations took place in 2020. SEO factors, you could see here, new URL structure. You can also see the data here, rerouting data. So I have shown everything that had the percentage of more than 1%, and you can see that it went well in more than 60% of cases. Domain rating pre and post migration. Gaining up to 20 was in 56% of cases. External links broken in the source. You can see that in 65% this was not the case. The next date for a confirmed update, you can see the data on this slide. So there was a very varied amount of data. Index of Systrix shows that these are general trends regarding means. I didn't take either news or discover data into account. Connotations of domain ratings, objectives of strategy were not known, and there were also some other technical aspects that limited the study. And you all can have access to this study results. Currently we only have data for Spain, but we can increase this study. I can say that the tool that I developed looks better on the website than in the mobile phone, and this is what it looks like. You can have the filters here where you can choose what you want to look at. The filters are general filters like the type, industry, year, age, status, but also the structure, type, redirections. You can see the table view, as you can see on this slide. It's also possible to have a visualization based on trends. So you can see the increases and the drops, and you can also see the distinguishing of the 3, 6, or 12 months. And the final view option is this one. It's the analytical view. You can see the factor graphs and the highest values highlighted here. So what can we say about the factors? If we compare this with the study, in the study we asked for people's opinions, and we saw that 35% of people who thought the migration went well actually still had a drop, but we also looked at other criteria such as the loss of authorship and so on. So it looks like more sites are likely to have an increase of visits after a migration than a decrease in visits. So the types of migrations you can see on this slide. We have a database that's focused on mostly domain to domain. We can see the highest numbers there, but the data can tell you what the most important sectors were. So in the sector, I didn't think there was any correlation between the data loss or data increase in respect to the sector. Now the impact of new domain. So here you can see some correlation. If we compare change from 0 to authorship, we can see that there is a bit of a change. But again, this depends on the kind of data that you have. Now, the new structure of URLs. And also other factors to take into account. Unfortunately, I didn't include some things in the study that I could have, which would have been interesting. But you can see here ratings before and after an update. So usually the rating increases after an update, but the authority change is also a factor that affects it. Here you also have broken links data. Perhaps there is too much correlation even, and this is something that I really like. So 26% of core updates were after an increase in rating, and 13% of product reviews, as you can see on this graph. So what does this all tell us? What can we learn from it? The focus that we should give to migration, well, as we know, migration is always a bit difficult, and it can feel offensive. We need to work very hard on it. We need to work on all the layers, the strategic, the technical layer, the data layer. We want to make sure not to lose authority of the domain. So this is the offensive side. The offensive side. The defensive way of doing it is to maintain the architecture, maintain content, to have a painless transition. And you can see that work is perhaps a bit more, a bit harder in the defensive side, but there are pros and cons to both of these. Less is more. This is something that I often tell people. If we try to make a lot of changes during the migration, there is a high chance of things going bad, because Google interprets a lot of things, and it's very hard to control what will increase and what will decrease. So I would say that less is more, and you shouldn't do everything at the same time during the migration. And you should try to prevent everything, foresee as much as you can. So reevaluation of Google. Google is going to reevaluate our site and overlook everything. So even a perfect migration can lose us rating, and that's something we need to remember. In Google documentation, it is already said officially that it's possible that you will lose ratings for a certain period of time. Yes, fine, but I want to still reach maximum results that I can, even taking into account these limitations. And another thing to take into account is that our server has to be prepared to do the migration. So our technicians need to bear this in mind, technologically speaking. And other things to take into account is if we go to a new domain, there are some things that are completely different, but it is possible that the ratings are inherited or not. So if you compare the top and the bottom ones, the graphs that you can see that the bottom one has changed quite a lot. In theory, the destination authorship starts from 0. Sometimes it's possible to have a lot of fluctuations in the original domain, but they decrease in the second one, in the new one. Also, if we go and migrate to places to domains that already exist, we need to take into account what has happened in those domains beforehand. So there is a lot of mathematics included here. We need to understand how these different layers can work together. And at the bottom you can see that there's been a sudden leap after a migration, so that's a positive situation. And we need to take into account both the integration itself as well as the external factors. And the question is which has more impact, the source location or the destination location? Well, this depends on the situation, and authority is also to be taken into account. During the migration, the team needs to be engaged. Should this be done on a Friday? Well, hopefully not. Will there be an update? We know that updates can happen at very different times. You can see here when all the updates since 2018 have taken place, and the core updates are here in red because these are the ones that have affected us the most. If we look here at June, June seems to be quite empty. So generally there are no changes in June, and we have more liberty in June. But June also tends to be the end of an update period. So you need to think about the right moment of doing things, and if you can't prevent changes, then you need to just deal with them as soon as you can. And you may have to deal with changes after a deployed update. So planning, rerouting and tests, you need to take into account the test environment, plan rerouting, make sure the audit doesn't show development towards the worst. There are always some requirements that are more important than others. So there are things which are must-have requirements, and then there are things that are nice to have. And testing is the most important thing. The Control Z option is also good to have. Having the backup copy just in case anything goes bad and you need to do a rollback. So in conclusion, I would say that rerouting is important. The server needs to be ready for the migration. It needs to be at supersonic speed. And if you want to help me continue this study, which only has 850 members at the moment, participants, I would like to include more in different languages, and I'd like to continue in analyzing this tool with more data. So if you do want to participate, please just contact me. And this is not going to be just a tool, but it's going to be an annual study published every year. So well, thank you very much for your participation, and I hope that next year I will have more things to share with you. And in the newsletter I will also have a lot of new information about this. Thank you.